So this is the last video for B1, okay? And in this video I'd like to just cover the carbon cycle and the nitrogen cycle, so it should be a fairly short video, and then all of B1 is covered, okay? Now the carbon cycle is important to understand because carbon makes up all living things. All living organisms that we know of are carbon based, so all living things are made of carbon, and we need to keep replacing this carbon. We need to keep recycling this carbon in order to survive, in order to live, okay? We give out carbon when we do things like having a wee or having a poo, and we take in carbon when we eat things, okay? So if we think about organisms, we have humans or animals, which are made up of carbon, as we've just said, and the other living things are plants, and they are also made up of carbon. Okay, so if we've got a plant here, I'll draw a nice yellow flower on it as well. So plants and animals are both made up of carbon. Okay, now this carbon is certainly moved from the plant to the human when we eat them. When we eat plants, we take in their carbon. The carbon from the plant goes into us, okay? But where do plants get their carbon from? Okay? Plants get their carbon through a process of photosynthesis, because carbon is found as carbon dioxide in the air, okay? And plants remove this carbon dioxide from the air through photosynthesis. So through photosynthesis, plants remove carbon dioxide from the air. So photosynthesis, and plants remove carbon dioxide in the air by using photosynthesis. But plants and animals both do something called respiration. And respiration puts carbon dioxide back into the air. It releases carbon dioxide and it makes it go back into the air. So this is known as respiration. So through respiration, both animals and plants put carbon dioxide back into the air. Now, as we said earlier, animals, I'm trying to think what colour best to use, animals also they excrete, okay? Basically they have a poo. So if we draw a nice turd here, okay? This is a form of releasing carbon called excretion. And it's basically having a wee or having a poo, okay? Now, sadly, animals, plants die someday. So if we draw someone who is obviously dead, and once they die, they get broken down by decomposers, okay? So animals and plants die, and the carbon that is inside of them has to be released some way. The carbon that is inside this poo has to be released some way. And it's through organisms known as decomposers that the carbon trapped in these animals is released, and the carbon that is trapped in the poo is also released. So decomposers break down these dead organisms, they break down the dead animals and the dead plants, and they also break down the poo or any excrement, and they release carbon dioxide as they do this. So decomposers, these include such as bacteria or fungi. Okay. Now, as decomposers break things down, they also respire. And this releases carbon dioxide into the air. So, decomposers do respiration. Okay. However, sometimes these dead organisms do not get broken down by decomposers. Okay, sometimes they're in such conditions that the decomposers don't work. Now, what happens in these times is that the dead animals and plants get compressed and become fossil fuels. So we can say in certain conditions, dead plants and animals get squashed into fossil fuels. Okay? And it's through these fossil fuels being used that we get something called combustion. Okay? And combustion is the burning of fossil fuels which releases carbon dioxide. So combustion is the burning of fossil fuels. So if we burn these fossil fuels, the carbons that were in these organisms when they died and they got squashed is released. If we burn things like ethane, methane, things like that, what we get is we get carbon dioxide produced, which is released into the air. Now, this whole process that we've described so far is known as the carbon cycle. And it just shows how carbon gets recycled in an ecosystem in the world. So we've got plants and animals. Animals eat plants, so the carbon that is trapped inside of the plant, because remember, all living things are made of carbon. The carbon that is trapped inside the plants is absorbed by the animal. The animal then respires to breathe out carbon dioxide, and then the plant takes in the carbon dioxide through photosynthesis to build up more plant. But then of an evening, the plant respires because there's no sunlight for photosynthesis to take place, and therefore it releases carbon dioxide. Plants and animals will eventually die, and animals will also excrete, they'll have a poo, and organisms such as bacteria and fungi can decompose dead material or poo and turn it into, well, break it back down into its own atoms. Okay? Now, these decomposers, as they break down dead material or poo, they respire, and when they respire, they release carbon dioxide. However, sometimes dead things do not get broken down by decomposers because the conditions aren't correct. So when they don't get broken down by decomposers, they become fossil fuels. And when they become fossil fuels, they get burnt in a process known as combustion, which releases carbon dioxide in the air, and the plants can absorb the carbon dioxide. So, if we have a look at the first worked example, it says a large forest is cleared by burning, what effects will this have on the amount of carbon dioxide in the air immediately and over a longer period? So, immediately, large amounts of carbon dioxide will be released into the air by the combustion of the trees. We're burning the trees, so we're releasing a lot of carbon dioxide. Whereas over a longer period, less carbon dioxide will be removed from the air than before because the trees would have used some of it for photosynthesis. Okay? So the carbon dioxide is likely to remain high. So if we look back at our picture here, the plants are taking in carbon dioxide from the air. Therefore, if the trees aren't there, they will no longer be able to do this. And by burning the plants, we're doing something called combustion, which releases carbon dioxide into the air. Okay? So, if we have a look at our, before we move on, it says, exam alert. In questions about the carbon cycle, you will be expected to make links between photosynthesis, respiration and combustion and the amount of carbon dioxide in the air. And it says here that students have struggled with exam questions similar to this. So make sure you are confident with the carbon cycle. If you are not, please don't hesitate to come and see me around school. So if you'd like to pause the video and then we can have a look at the answers to these questions in a moment. Okay, so hopefully you've had a go at those questions. The first one says, describe the role of decomposing the carbon cycle, 1 mark. You should have said that decomposers release carbon back into the air as carbon dioxide during respiration. So when decomposers break down dead organisms and excrement, poo, they respire and release the carbon back into the air as carbon dioxide. Okay? Second question, explain the effect of respiration, photosynthesis and combustion in the carbon cycle in transferring carbon dioxide to and from the atmosphere. So you should have said, respiration releases carbon from compounds in living organisms as carbon dioxide. So during respiration, carbon dioxide is released from living things. 1 mark. Second mark for saying photosynthesis takes carbon dioxide from the air during photosynthesis. That's your second mark. And your third mark for saying combustion releases carbon from from dead living things as fossil fuels. So combustion is when we burn something to release the carbon from it as carbon dioxide. So 1 mark for saying respiration releases carbon dioxide. Second mark for saying photosynthesis takes in carbon dioxide from the air. And third mark for saying combustion, the burning of things, releases carbon dioxide into the air. Okay, so final part, we're working through it quite quickly. As I said, this would only be a short video. The nitrogen cycle. Now, the nitrogen cycle is slightly different to the carbon cycle. Okay? The important thing you need to remember here is that organisms cannot use nitrogen gas. So, organisms cannot use nitrogen gas. They have to convert it into nitrates first. Okay, so it has to be converted into nitrates. Now, nitrates are important parts of proteins. Living things need nitrates in order to build proteins. Okay, so we can say nitrates are needed to build proteins. Needed for protein. You have to have nitrates in order to build proteins. Okay? So if we're starting with nitrogen gas in the air, okay, we're going to start with nitrogen gas in the air. So we've got nitrogen gas in the air, okay? Now, nitrogen gas in the air gets converted into ammonia in the soil. Ammonia in the soil. So, ammonia in soil. And the way that it is converted into ammonia in the soil is through nitrogen fixing bacteria, okay? So, these are known as nitrogen fixing bacteria. So, nitrogen fixing bacteria. Okay? Once it's in the soil, it needs to be converted into nitrates. Nitrates, again, which are in the soil. So, nitrates in soil, because remember, nitrogen cannot be used on its own. It needs to be used as a nitrate for proteins. So we've got nitrates in the soil, and they convert ammonia in the soil into nitrates. Now these are known as nitrifying bacteria. Nitrifying bacteria. Nitrifying bacteria. Okay? Now nitrifying bacteria turn ammonia into nitrates. Now, nitrogen gas can be made from nitrates. Sorry, go back to my white. Nitrates in the soil can be turned back into nitrogen gas with the use of denitrifying bacteria. Denitrifying bacteria. So, denitrifying bacteria. And what these do is these turn nitrates in the soil back into nitrogen gas in the air. So we've got a cycle. We've got nitrogen gas in the air, which can be turned into nitrogen-fixing bacteria, which can be turned back into ammonia, by nitrogen-fixing bacteria. The ammonia in the soil can be turned into nitrates by using nitrifying bacteria, and the nitrates in the soil can be turned into nitrogen gas again by denitrifying bacteria. Okay? Now there is a shorter step in this, where, what colour shall I use? Red, where nitrogen gas can be turned straight into nitrates in the soil by lightning. Okay? So, lightning, if I can spell it, so lightning, okay? Lightning can turn nitrogen gas straight into nitrates, okay? Now, the important thing here is that these nitrates in the soil are used by plants. Okay, I'll get another chance to draw a beautiful flower. Plants use the nitrates in the soil in order to build proteins. Okay, so plants use the nitrates to build proteins. Okay? And then the proteins in the plant are passed on to the primary consumer, which may be a cute little rabbit. Oh my god, if I can draw a rabbit. Best rabbit ever, I think you'll agree. Okay? And then the primary consumer is eaten. And this time for ease, I'll just draw a stickman. The primary consumer is eaten, and the proteins are passed up the food chain. Okay? So the proteins are passed along food chains. So the plants absorb the nitrates in the soil to build proteins, and then the proteins are passed along the food chain. Okay? Now, all these living things can eventually die. Well, they do die. And what happens is they get broken back down into ammonia in the soil. So if we switch to a yellow, and we'll go across here, down to here, and we'll join here and here, and we'll say proteins in dead organisms. These contribute to ammonia in the soil through the use of decomposers, like we spoke about in the carbon cycle. Decomposers. And also things such as urea or urine also contribute to this. So we can have a line going to here, and we can say urine, which also contributes to ammonia in the soil, because ammonia is what makes urine smell, particularly cat urine. Okay? Now, some plants have nitrogen fixing bacteria in their roots. Okay? So they can use nitrogen gas directly. So nitrogen fixing bacteria on roots. Okay? And that is pretty much the nitrogen cycle. The way to think of this is that organisms cannot use nitrogen gas on its own. It's too stable. Okay, nitrogen gas is really, really stable. So it needs to be converted into nitrates, which are needed for protein. So nitrogen gas in the air is turned into ammonia in the soil by nitrogen fixing bacteria. The ammonia in the soil is turned into nitrates by nitrifying bacteria. Okay? Then nitrates in the soil are turned back into nitrogen gas by denitrifying bacteria. So we've got this cycle here. Nitrogen gas in the air can also be turned into nitrates through lightning, as in thunder and lightning. Yeah, it turns nitrogen gas into nitrates. These nitrates in the soil are then used by plants to build proteins, and the proteins are passed along the food chain when the primary consumer eats the plant, and then the secondary consumer eats the primary consumer. The primary and secondary consumers, they urinate, and their urine, when they have a wee, contributes to ammonia in the soil. And then the living things, so the producer, the primary consumer, and the secondary consumer, can all die at some point. And when they die, the proteins in their bodies are broken down by decomposers to add to the ammonia in the soil. Now, nitrogen fixing bacteria is also found on the roots of some plants, and therefore it sort of ignores all these steps. They just break nitrogen gas straight into nitrates. Okay? The important thing is that you know the functions of nitrogen fixing bacteria, nitrifying bacteria, and denitrifying bacteria. So nitrogen fixing bacteria, they convert nitrogen gas into ammonia. So these do nitrogen gas into ammonia. It's getting crowded here. Nitrifying bacteria turn ammonia into nitrates. So these turn ammonia into nitrates. And denitrifying bacteria turn nitrates into nitrogen gas. So these turn nitrates into nitrogen gas. Okay? So nitrogen fixing bacteria turn nitrogen gas into ammonia, nitrifying bacteria turn ammonia into nitrates, and denitrifying bacteria turn nitrates into nitrogen gas. So, final parts. Worked example, plants grow well in fertile soil. Explain how bacteria help to keep the soil fertile. It says on the exam alert on the right, in a question on root nodules, that's basically parts of a plant's roots where bacteria can be found. Remember that these are related to bacteria that make nitrogen compounds, not the water or mineral absorbing abilities of plants. So when we're talking about root nodules, we're talking about where the bacteria are found. That's what the bacteria do, not what the plant would do anyway. So the student has said, plants need nitrogen for making proteins, but they can only take in nitrogen in the form of nitrogen compounds such as nitrates. Soil bacteria act as decomposers, releasing ammonia from proteins in dead bodies and from urea, which is urine. Nitrifying bacteria in the soil turn ammonia into nitrates in the soil. Plants can then use the nitrates to make proteins. Nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the soil and root nodules convert nitrogen gas from the air into nitrogen compounds that the plant can use. This would be a full mark answer. Okay? So, for the final time in B1, what I would like you to do is I'd like you to pause the video and I'd like you to have a go at these questions, then replay the video in a moment and we'll mark them. Okay, so the first question says, identify two different ways that nitrogen in the air is converted into nitrates in the soil. You should have said that soil bacteria convert nitrogen to ammonia and then to nitrates. So you should have said that these nitrogen fixing bacteria turn nitrogen gas into ammonia, and then the ammonia is turned into nitrates by nitrifying bacteria. That would have given you 1 mark. Your second mark comes from saying lightning. Lightning can convert nitrogen gas into nitrates. Second question. Farmers plough crop stubble back into the soil after harvesting. Explain how this helps improve soil fertility. Okay. Now, if we have a look back here, dead plants are broken down by decomposers to release ammonia, which is turned into nitrates by nitrifying bacteria, which can then be used by new plants. Okay, so for your marks for this second question, you should have said the dead plant material contains proteins, 1 mark. The decomposers break down the proteins and release ammonia into the soil, 2 marks. So 1 mark for saying the dead plants contain proteins, 2nd mark for saying that decomposers break down these proteins to release ammonia into the soil. The nitrifying bacteria then turn this into nitrates, is your 3rd mark. And your 4th mark comes from saying that the nitrates are then used by plants planted by the farmer to grow, to build new proteins. So 1 mark for saying that the dead plant material contains proteins. 2nd mark for saying that decomposers break down these proteins into ammonia. 3rd mark for saying the ammonia is turned into nitrates by nitrifying bacteria. And your 4th mark comes from saying that the nitrates produced are absorbed by plants and used to build new proteins. So, I hope this has been of some use to you. You should have now roughly about 9 hours worth of lessons for B1, as At current time of recording, you have got 91 days until your B1 exam. So hopefully these videos are of some use. Please make sure you're doing the flashcards, and please make sure you're doing the exam questions that I set along with these videos. If you need any help with anything, come and find me. Okay? Thank you.